Some of you may not know this about me, but before I married Jenna, that was almost 13 years ago, I was 19, and I had gotten a little overweight. I was a couple chalupas shy of 200 pounds, and I'd really kind of like let myself go. And one of the big reasons I found myself in this situation could be summed up in 2 words. What do you think those 2 words are? Okay, 4 words. So, that's funny. So it actually wasn't Taco Bell what I'm going to say, but that's funny. You know me well. So, 4 words. Taco Bell and Big Gulp. Everyone say Big Gulp. Does anybody remember these big cups that were sold at 7-Eleven? I remember these cups. I'm pretty sure I could fit my daughter in one of these cups. But when I was 19, I went on a music tour for a few months, and we were living off gas station food and fast food. And so I got one of these big gulps to save some money because it was like 50 cents to fill it up. And I kid you not, each and every day, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, I filled it up probably minimum 4 times to the top and drank it, full of Mountain Dew. If you cut me, I would bleed green. Like I had so much Mountain Dew coursing through my veins. And so, don't judge me, I thought we were a loving church. What happened to that grace stuff we just prayed about? I'm fairly confident I shaved a few years off my life, all because of the big gulp. But all of this is to set up today's teaching today. If you're taking notes or following along in the app, the title for today's teaching is this: Jesus is the ultimate big gulp. Come on, somebody. Jesus is the ultimate big gulp. It may be my worst sermon title. It may be my best sermon title. I'm not sure. You can shoot me an email and maybe I'll read it. But we're going with it. Jesus is the ultimate big gulp. Are you ready today, Canvas family? Okay. I believe if we're expectant that we'll receive what we're ready to receive, that we get what we expect. So let's enter into the scriptures today, ready to receive from the Lord and hear his voice today. John chapter 40. Verse 1 through 30, we're going to read a chunk of scripture here, but I believe one of the most powerful stories of Jesus' ministry, and it gives us a glimpse into what God is like as we see who Jesus is. Verse 1 says this: Jesus knew the Pharisees had heard that he was baptizing and making more disciples than John. Though Jesus himself didn't baptize them, his disciples did. So he left Judea and returned to Galilee. He had to go through Samaria on the way. And eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some Chick-fil-A. The woman was surprised. It's the Chick-fil-A translation I'm reading from right now. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me and I would give you living water. But sir, you don't even have a rope or a bucket." She said, "And this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" Jesus replied, "Anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again, but those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water, then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." "Go and get your husband," Jesus told her. That's funny. Yeah, about that, Jesus. I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband, for you have 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now." I read the Bible. That's how I read it in my head right now. "You certainly spoke the truth." "Sir," the woman said, "you must be a prophet or stalker. We're trying to figure that out. So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it is here at Mount Gerizim where our ancestors worshiped?" Jesus replied, "Believe me, dear woman, a time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him, for salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming, indeed it is here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is the Spirit, so those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. The woman said, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called the Christ, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus told her, I am the Messiah. Just then his disciples came back, and Peter, dropping his Chick-fil-A sandwich, was shocked to find him talking to a woman. But none of them had the nerve to ask, what do you want with her, or why are you talking to her? The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, come and see who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah? So the people came streaming from the village to see him. Jesus is the ultimate big gulp. Today, I want to look at this story of Jesus and his interaction with the Samaritan woman because it really reveals to us the heart and soul, I believe, of who God is and what he's offering each and every one of us here today. See, the good news is good news, and I apologize if you've ever been in a place like this, hearing a guy like me, and the good news didn't sound very good. But I want you to know it's not only good news, it's still good news available to you and I today. And so what I'm going to share with you today is the good news that is still available to you and me because of who Jesus is. If you're taking notes, the first thing is this: Jesus is where you are. Jesus is where you are. Jesus is where you are. Have you ever had that person? Let's just be honest. We can be real, right? Have you ever had that person that you would do anything to avoid? Come on now. Some of you are like laughing awkwardly. Are you sitting next to that person? Why are you being weird right now? Like, I would imagine all of us have had a person or two that you intentionally try to avoid. Come on, have you ever had that person and you walk into a room and there they are and you're not sure if they saw you yet, so you're slowly backing away, hoping that maybe they don't see you. And they're like, hey, Bob. You're like, hey, I was looking for you. I'm so glad you're here. Wow, what are the odds? We all have people that we have tried to avoid. I had a guy in our previous church in Arizona where Jenna and I were young adult pastors, and I would avoid this guy like the plague. Don't judge me. I'm not like, he wasn't a mean guy. He wasn't rude. There was nothing really wrong with him. He was actually one of the nicest guys on planet Earth that I've ever met. The reason that I would avoid this guy whenever I saw him was because this guy really, really, really liked to hug me. And I'm not talking about like side hug or like, what's up, bro, or anything like that. It was like a full frontal bear hug. He would lift me off the ground. I would feel my vertebrae cracking one by one by one. And I loathed this. I don't know if that makes me a bad person, but when I heard him, and I knew when he was coming because he had a very distinct laugh. It sounded like this. That's what it sounded like. I'm not lying to you right now. So he would be like a mile away. I'd hear, and I'd be like, I got to go. I got to get out of here now. To give you an image of what I'm talking about, if you remember the scene from Jurassic Park, this is kind of sums it up right here. This is kind of what it looked like. If it still doesn't resonate, if you're not capturing the emotions of how I felt when I heard this guy, this next picture might prove what I felt. Right there. That pretty much sums it up. Poor girl. I got to get her like in my sermons as much as I can before she turns into a teenager and says, I can't do this anymore. But chances are you have someone in your life that at some point in your life you tried to avoid. I have some good news for you today, and it's still good news for you today. God is way better than me. Can I get an amen on that? And here's the even better news. He's better than you too. Because I have good news, and that good news is that Jesus doesn't avoid anybody. Man, if you're taking notes today, you need to understand there is not one person on planet Earth that Jesus is avoiding, but every person on planet Earth he's pursuing. There is not a person that Jesus avoids. And John chapter 4 screams this to be true. Because we see in verse 4 of John chapter 4, it says, he had to go through Samaria. Everyone say, he had to. He had to. He had to go through Samaria. Now, if you're not careful, you'll read that Jesus had to go through Samaria as if there was no other option for him, that this was the only road to get him to the destination that he was headed to, but that simply isn't true. Jesus didn't have to, because he could have gone around Samaria like every other Jewish rabbi would have done. in order to get to their destination. He could have added 2 or 3 days to his trip, just like every other Jewish rabbi would have done in order to avoid Samaria. But it says that he had to, but it wasn't like he had to, it was like more like he had to. Do you know the difference? Like I got to take the trash out on Mondays, I have to. I have to take those 10 feet to the front curb, first world problems, right? And I have to do that, right? But on Friday, I have to take my daughter Finley to soccer practice. I have to do that. Why? Because I don't want to miss a moment with her. I need to be around her each and every step of her life. I don't want to miss a thing with her because she is absolutely amazing. I love my daughter. She's not a very good soccer player yet, but I love going. I love going with her. She's like 23 months. I'll give her a break. But you know the difference between you have to and you have to, right? There's some things you have to do, and then there's some things you're like, if I don't do this, I won't be complete. If I don't do this, I won't truly be living. You see, one have to is out of obligation. The other have to is out of love. And when Jesus had to go to Samaria, you need to understand it was the latter, not the former. Jesus had to because there was a person there that he was pursuing. Isn't it funny? This story begins with the religious leaders arguing about crowds, and Jesus completely ignores the conversation, and he goes and pursues the one. That's who Jesus is, because he doesn't see any human being on this planet as a problem to solve. He sees each and every human being on this planet as a person to love. Come on, somebody. He doesn't see you as a problem to solve. He sees you as a person to love, and Jesus would leave all the crowds in order to pursue you. I love that Jesus didn't engage in debates because Jesus didn't walk this earth to win debates. He came here to win people. Christians, we should take some notes. We're not here to win debates. We're here to win people. We're not here to be right. We're here to do what's right. We're going to let our life do the talking. And we're not going to choose arguments over people. And so Jesus didn't have to die on the cross any more than he had to go through Samaria. He had to go to Samaria because there was a woman there isolated, alone, carrying shame, and he had to meet her where she was. Verse 7 says, soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus told her, please give me a drink. He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, you are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink? See, this Samaritan woman knew something about Jewish rabbis and their posture and stance towards Samaritans that she thinks Jesus must have forgotten. And that perspective, that posture that Jewish rabbis had towards the Samaritan people was that the Jewish rabbis hated the Samaritans, and they saw the women, especially Samaritan women, as people to be avoided. But Jesus, he's where this woman is, because that's who Jesus is. He is where you are. See, Jews didn't associate with Samaritans. As a matter of fact, the typical Jew would go around Samaria, as I said, in order to avoid even breathing the same air as a half-breed Samaritan. And they also viewed them not only as a half-breed, but as a heretic, because they didn't believe everything the Jews believed. And this feud in the time of Jesus had now gone over 750 years. But Jews not only hated Samaritans, but Jewish rabbis especially saw women, especially Samaritan women, to be avoided. So this story is problematic in two ways. One, she's a Samaritan. Two, she is a she. And Jewish rabbis would often have a very low view of women and avoid women. There was even a prayer that many Jews in the day of Jesus would pray, and the prayer would go like this. They would start their day and say, God, thank you that I'm neither a Gentile, a slave, or a woman. Right? Pretty intense. There was even a segment of Pharisees, the religious elite of Jesus' day, that they were called the bleeding and bruised Pharisees. And the reason they were called the bleeding and bruised Pharisees was because to avoid even risking lusting after a woman, whenever a woman was in their vicinity, they would cover their eyes and walk around with their eyes closed. And they were called the bleeding and bruised Pharisees because they would literally run into things and injure themselves as a result. That's funny. I think that's awesome. But that's what makes this moment so astounding. In a single moment, you thought Jesus was just asking for water. But Jesus was confronting racial bigotry, religious intolerance, and sexism by showing up to this woman and going against the grain of his culture. Jesus avoids no one. Man, I don't know about you, but I think it's time for a church that stands up for racial equality, for equality among every gender. It doesn't matter your story. It doesn't matter your background. You see, people who are nothing like Jesus, and Jesus seemed to like people who were nothing like him. And so if people nothing like Jesus don't like you, you need to ask yourself, are you anything like Jesus? Because Jesus was where people were, especially people who were nothing like him. While everybody else was trying to avoid these particular people, Jesus went exactly where they were. But Jesus is not only where we are, Jesus is also everything we need. Jesus is also everything we need. Verse 10, Jesus replied, if you only knew the gift God has for you and who you're speaking to, you would ask me and I would give you living water. But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket. And she said, and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? So can I give you a little advice? When you're talking to God, if you ever start the sentence you don't have, you're probably wrong. Right? You're probably wrong no matter what you're about to say next. The disciples learned this in John chapter 6 when they're like, Jesus, you don't have enough food to feed all these people. He's like, oh yeah? He steals some little boy's lunchbox and then feeds a crowd of thousands with some bread and some fish. We see it again and again and again that when you have Jesus, you have everything. You didn't hear me, my mic might have cut out. When you have Jesus, you have everything. Those who know that to be true, come on, right? When you have Jesus, you have everything. But the woman didn't know that yet. She didn't know what she had because she was stuck looking at what she didn't have. The miracle was standing right there in front of her eyes, and the reason she wasn't seeing it was because the first thought that she attached herself to is what they didn't have. You don't got a rope or a bucket, Jesus. Come on, who hasn't been there? I've been there. Like weekly, I've been there. And I found that what stops most people from breakthrough in their faith, breakthrough in their life, isn't what they don't know to be true. It's what they think they know to be true that actually isn't. Right? Hear me on that. Like what stops most people from experiencing a breakthrough in their faith, a breakthrough in their life, is not what they don't know. It's what they think they know to be true that actually isn't. And so God is right in front of you and wanting to give you healing, but you already have all the reasons why you're not going to experience healing. And that God's right in front of you and he wants to offer you freedom, but man, you got 3 top reasons why you're never going to experience freedom. God is in front of you and he's wanting to provide you a life of freedom that will quench your thirst. And your first thought is, man, I don't got a rope or a bucket though. And I feel for this woman though. And if you're an introvert in the room, I was about to say, who here's an introvert, which would be pointless. I don't know. Glad I stopped myself. But if you're an introvert in this room, then you should feel for this woman as well. She's going to the well at noon. What's the big deal with that? Well, most scholars agree that the reason that anyone would go to the well at noon, the hottest time of the day, is because you don't want to talk to anyone that was the abnormal time for anyone else to be going to the well to pitch some water. And so you have this woman who's going to the well at the exact wrong time of the day, and most agree it's because this woman didn't want to talk to anyone. And then here she walks up to the well. Here's this joker sitting on the edge, Jesus. She's like, oh, great. I didn't want to talk to anybody. Then here's this guy. Surprise, you have an appointment with God, right? Like, this was not what she was expecting. This was an interruption. But little did she know that what appeared to be an interruption was actually an intervention happening right in front of her very eyes. Man, I need somebody, maybe you're in the back and you need to hear this, so I'm going to say it pretty loud right now. Sometimes God's interventions will show up in your life, and they will show up in your life as interruptions. And there's some people, you miss the interventions that God is wanting to do in your life because you keep writing them off as interruptions. I wonder how many miracles have been looking at us us right in the eye, but we've missed it because you said that's just an interruption. Can I give you a good prayer to pray when you feel like life is being interrupted? I would bet some of you right now, you feel like life is just interrupting you. You could pray this. You could pray, God, why is this happening to me? But let me give you a better prayer. Let me give you a better prayer. A better prayer is saying, God, what are you trying to do for me? God, not what are you doing? Why is this happening to me? But okay, God, what is it that you're trying to do for me? What is it that you're trying to show me? That posture may be the very game changer for you to get a different perspective in your life. See, this woman is staring right at her miracle, and she doesn't even know that everything she needs is in this rabbi in front of her. Verse 13 says, anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again, but those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring. Say it out loud. Within. A little louder now. Within. It becomes a bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. Underline within. That's important. You see, Jesus is beginning to break down the barriers that this woman has built. And Jesus is saying, look, you are so focused on what's going on around you that you're missing what I'm wanting to do within you. You see, religion works from the outside in. Jesus works from the inside out. He starts with your heart, and he goes from there. And this is why I love the Bible, because there are so many things happening underneath everything that we're reading. The woman came to a well, but she ended up meeting a well. She thought Jesus didn't have a bucket, but the entire time, Jesus is trying to show her that she is the bucket, and Jesus is the well, extending to her what she needs most, to fill her soul with living water. Come on, this isn't a story about a woman who goes to a physical well. She goes to a well called Jesus where living water is to be found. And this isn't a story about how Jesus forgot his bucket. Jesus knew his bucket was coming, and her name was the Samaritan woman. This is a story about a woman realizing that she didn't need a bucket because she was the bucket, because Jesus is the well that pours living water into her soul. And I believe that Jesus is maybe trying to say to someone today that your life, your satisfaction, your hope, your future is not found in finding a better bucket. It's found in finding a better well. Come on, I'm going to say it again so you hear it from the back. Life is not found in a better bucket. It's found in a better well. And there's some of you, you're spending all your time trying to find a new bucket. Man, if I had a better spouse, then I'd be satisfied. Man, if I had a better job, then I'd be satisfied. If I had a better roommate, then I'd be satisfied. If I actually was in a relationship and not single anymore, then I'd be satisfied. If I moved from San Francisco, then I would be satisfied. But friend, you need to understand life isn't found in finding a better bucket. Life is found in finding a better well, because you are the bucket. Maybe this is what the psalmist in Psalm 34, verse 8 is saying when he says, come and see and taste that the Lord is good. Maybe you came today, maybe for the first time, and you're hoping maybe this guy up here would give you a better bucket. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I can't give you a better bucket, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to point you to the better well. I'm going to point you to the one. His name is Jesus, who is the living water, who can bring sustainability and satisfaction to your soul. And I have good news for you. Jesus doesn't just want to fill you up to the brim. He wants to fill you to overflowing. Because Jesus is where you are. Jesus is where you are. And Jesus is everything you need. And the third is that Jesus is leading you forward. Some of you are like, thank God for that, because I don't want to stay where I am any longer. Jesus is leading you into a future worth fighting for, if you'll follow him. Verse 15 says, please, sir, the woman said, give me this water, then I'll never be thirsty again. And for a moment here, you're like, she's getting it. She's starting to understand what Jesus is saying, but there's no period. There's a comma in it. She says, and I won't have to come here to get water. So close. So close. So she hears Jesus, and she's like, oh, you got that magic water, boy? Give me some of that. And it's like Jesus knows, all right, I got to go a little bit deeper. If she's going to understand what I'm talking about, I'm going to have to go a little deeper. And he says this in verse 16. He says, go and get your husband. Jesus told her, and then she says, I don't have a husband. The woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband." Now, at first, this seems like a nice invitation from Jesus. Go get your husband. I hear Bob's a great guy. Let's invite him over for dinner. But what we'll see is that when the woman responds, she only gives part of the truth of her situation. See, I have a question whenever I go into meetings that I know are probably going to be confrontational, especially if the meeting itself was confrontational. There's always a question I'll typically end on in that meeting, and that question is there any last 10% that you really feel you need to share before we leave? And the reason I ask that question is because in 13 years of ministry and working with people, I've learned something to be true, not necessarily for everybody, but for most people, and that is that people will often go 90% with the truth, but they'll leave out the last 10%, and the last 10% is the most important. Come on, I hope you're taking notes today. This is a good marriage lesson I'm giving you right now for free. Relationship lesson. You see, it's easy to go the 90%, but the last 10% is the most important. And you need to understand that being only honest about 90% of the truth can very well keep you from 100% of the healing that God has for your life. But Jesus is so good. You know why he's so good? Because he's willing to bypass your comfort in order to get to your calling. He's willing to bypass your comfort in order to get to your calling, so he goes a little bit deeper. Now, before I go to verse 18 and read this out to you, before I go there, I want to tell you a story real quick. It's a true story and a funny story. At least I think it's funny. So this bride, she's getting engaged. She's engaged to be married, and so she goes to a bakery. She's going to a bakery to get her cake ordered. Speaking of engaged, Katie Doyle got engaged. What? Canvas family. That's awesome. Just embarrassing you. That's no biggie. So this woman is engaged to be married. She goes to the bakery, and she orders her cake, and she tells the baker, she says, "Look, I want my favorite verse to be on this cake." And she said, "My favorite verse is 1 John 4:18. And that verse is, 'Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear.'" Come on, that's a wedding cake verse if I ever heard one. And so she's like, "I want 1 John 4:18 on my cake." And the guy's like, "No problem, we can do that." So she leaves. A few months pass by. It's the week of her wedding. The baker calls this woman and says, "Hey, are you sure you want this verse on your cake? I'm just calling to double check. You really want?" And she gets a little bridezilla on him. And she's like, "Yes, I want that verse on my cake. It's my favorite verse. Just put the verse on the cake." And he says, "Okay, I'll put the verse on the cake. I just wanted to double check." And so he puts the verse on the cake, and a couple days later, the cake arrives on the wedding day, and the bride sees it for the first time, and she is horrified because what she realized is why the baker was calling in the first place. She accidentally told him to put John 4:18 on the cake instead of 1 John 4:18, and that is our next verse, and this is what it said on her cake: "For you have had 5 husbands." "And you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." That's amazing. It's amazing. Come on, somebody, let's get back to Jesus. Jesus doesn't let this woman, he doesn't let this woman leave without being 100% honest about her past. Some of you need to know that God loves you, and he loves you so much, he'll bypass your comfort to take you to your calling. And he loves you so much that he will call you to be 100% honest if you want to experience the 100% healing that he wants to bring about in your life. Because hear me on this, you won't heal from that which you will not reveal. You won't heal if you're not willing to reveal it. And when Jesus comes for us, he doesn't come looking for our trophies. He comes looking for our scars. He comes looking for our wounds, because Jesus has come so that you may be fully alive here and now. Not just life after death, but life before death. He has come to bring you healing right here, right now, to lead you into your greatest future. See, the reason she was at the well at noon was probably because everyone else had been kind of hanging shame over her because of her situation, but Jesus came to replace that shame with satisfaction. He came to replace that shame with healing. Why? Because that's what Jesus does. I'm so sorry if you have a vision in your mind of God who looks at your mistakes, who looks at your wounds, and he's standing at you like this. Can I tell you what? If Jesus is like God and God is like Jesus, and we know what God believes through the behaviors of Jesus, then I can assure you that when you come to God with your wounds, with your scars, with your past, with your regrets, that your God will not be with arms closed, but arms wide open, ready to heal, ready to provide, ready to lead you into the future. I wonder if God is telling some of us today that He knows that you've been trying to move up in life and you're still not satisfied. He knows that you're finally in a relationship and yet still not satisfied. He knows that some of you, perhaps you moved to San Francisco thinking the city was going to finally bring you the satisfaction and joy you're looking for, but you're still not satisfied. And Jesus is saying, I believe to someone today that it's because you're drinking from the wrong well, and the only way you will find the healing and satisfaction your soul needs is if you allow Jesus to fill 100% of who you are. Why? Because last thing is this. Because Jesus is life here and now. Jesus is where you are. Jesus is everything you need. Jesus is leading you to the future. And Jesus is life. Everyone say life. He's life here and now. Verse 19. Sir, the woman said, you must be a prophet, so tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it is here in Mount Gerizim where our ancestors worship? Jesus replied, believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him. For salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming, indeed it is, say it with me, here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. And I love the woman's response. I know the Messiah is coming, the one who's called the Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. I think this is hilarious. Everything that she's experienced, the Bible is anything but boring. Only boring people think the Bible is boring. This is funny stuff. She was like, I know that he is coming. He is coming. This woman, she has come down with something that I've come down with before, and I'm sure maybe some of us, maybe even now, have come down, and that's a case of the some days, right? She's going, someday I'll know this peace. Someday I'll know this freedom. Someday I'll be whole. Someday I'll be healed. Someday I'll have the hope that my soul longs for. And Jesus is like, hello? Do I need to do a dance in front of you? Like I'm here. Someday is this day. What are you not understanding? And finally, he just spells it out as clear as day. He says, I am the Messiah. She's like, the Messiah is going to come someday. And he's like, okay, I don't know what else to do. I'm just going to make this simple. I am the Messiah. Jesus is saying that someday has arrived this day. Jesus is looking at this woman and saying, I'm the one. I'm the one. You've been looking for the one in another bucket, in another well, in another relationship, but I'm telling you that no bucket, no well, no relationship, unless it's a relationship with me, will satisfy your soul the way that your soul deserves to be satisfied. I'm the one. I'm the one you've been looking for. I'm the one you've been searching for. I'm the one who brings hope. I'm the one who brings peace. I'm the one who brings healing. You've been looking everywhere. Today is the day you can stop looking, because your future, your hope, your peace is not someday in the future. It's right here in the present, because I am the one. He says, I am the Messiah. I am the Messiah. And I love this next part. It says, just then his disciples came back. Bad timing. But they were shocked to find him talking to a woman, but none of them had the nerve to ask, what do you want with her? Or why are you talking to her? And I love this. The woman left her water jar, her bucket, right? She left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village telling everyone, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. I have to pause here because we need to acknowledge a shift has taken place in this woman. She went from not wanting to be around anyone, not wanting to really share her story with Jesus, to now going back to a village and sharing her entire story. You see, that's what happens when you start drinking from the well of life, that Jesus takes what once were scars that you tried to hide, and they turn into stories of hope that the world needs to hear. Jesus never hid his scars, so neither do you. The grace of Jesus, man, it begins to change us. I love it. She went to a well, she met a well, and then she became a well. Man, could that be possible for you, for me, for us? I love the next verse. That could he possibly be the Messiah? So the people, they came streaming from the village to see him. Jesus is the ultimate big gulp. Jesus is where you are. Jesus is everything we need. Jesus is leading you forward. And Jesus is life here and now. Jesus is the well. You didn't know it, but you've been in the middle of an acronym the entire time. Jesus is the well. Jesus is the well, because he's wherever you are. He's everything you need. He's leading you forward, and he is life here and now. He's the one that you've been looking for. I think it is just interesting that we never get the woman's name in the story. And I think the reason that John never gives us the name of the woman in John chapter 4 is because perhaps he was worried if he gave us the name of the woman in John chapter 4, we would think that this was an isolated event just about the story of that particular woman. But is it possible that John never gave us the name of the woman in John 4 because he's trying to say, you are the woman in John 4? You are, this is your story. This isn't just a story about one person. This is a story about all people that are searching and trying to find satisfaction. And John is saying through the life of Jesus that Jesus is the one. And now we know why Jesus had to go through Samaria. He didn't have to, as if there was no other route. He didn't have to get a glass of water as if that was the only place he could have found some. He could have gone anywhere for those things, but he had to go through Samaria. Why? To dig a well in this woman's heart so that he could fill her heart, her soul, her life with living water. Why did Jesus come to this earth? Why did Jesus live a perfect life? Why did Jesus die on a cross? And why did Jesus rise again? Friend, you need to know, he didn't have to do it. When you're God, you don't have to do anything. But he had to do it, not out of obligation, but out of love. And he came, he lived, he died, and he rose again. Why? Because he was digging a well in the heart of humanity so that he could pour living water into humanity again, so that humanity could be fully alive here and now. And that's why we can have hope in the midst of disappointment. That's why we can have hope when things don't go our way. That's why we can have hope when we're hurt. That's why we can have hope when we don't understand, because we know that in those situations, God is able to dig a well through it and pour living water in it. I believe that Jesus is saying to someone today who's dissatisfied with their life, he's saying with you, and hear me on this, I believe he's saying, if you're here like, I'm not satisfied, friend, you are the woman in John chapter 4. I've been there, we've all been there, and he's saying to you today, I'm with you wherever you are. I'm everything you need, and I'm leading you forward to a great future, and I'm the life you are looking for. So may we look today our miracle in the eyes. May we not allow what we think we know to stop us from experiencing what we could never know on our own. May we allow ourselves to be honest and vulnerable in order for Jesus to begin healing us fully. May we put down the many buckets we're carrying, and may our lives become the bucket that God pours his life into. And this hope I'm talking about is not a hope for tomorrow. It's not a hope for next year. It's not a hope for someday. The hope I am offering you today, rather that Jesus offered 2,000 years ago, is a hope that is still good news and still available for us today. So may we come and see and taste that the Lord is good.